This is the Commodore 486 SX25, arguably one of the prettiest PCs from the 90s, and quite possibly the last quote-unquote real Commodore. It was manufactured early in 1993, 1 year before Commodore started to license their brand to other manufacturers, and a year and a half before Commodore's liquidation. I bought this Commodore many years ago without the original motherboard, but thanks to some old pictures online, I have been able to identify and find a board for it. Unfortunately, the board was Varda bombed. I have repaired the visible damage, but it's still glitchy. We have previously overclocked this machine and doubled the speed, so far. In this video we are going to do some repair of the motherboard and do some more overclocking to see if it will go even faster. In this video we are also going to try out a new soldering station, the FNIRSI DWS-200. This video is sponsored by PCB, more on this later. Thank you PCB for supporting this channel. The gorgeous case of this Commodore is very similar to the Amiga 4000. So whoever designed the case for the Amiga 4000 obviously designed this case too. The problem we are having with this machine is that depending on what slots I install the graphics card, it will either display some weird graphics or just give me 8 angry beeps and showing nothing on the display. Occasionally it will boot and work. Let's start by pulling those cards out. The motherboard is only locked down with one screw, and the rest are these extremely annoying plastic clips. This motherboard is a pain to get out and reinstall. Well, actually it came off quite easily this time. Occasionally this machine also holds when counting up the RAM during post, so quite possibly one of these SIM slots is bad too. As you can see, this board looks pretty clean after the initial repair, but all the solder joints on all of the components on this edge here, they were really heavily corroded. And these two pin headers here were completely wasted, so we have replaced them. The only signs of the initial repair on this side of the board are a few tin traces, barely noticeable. One possible explanation here is that the battery juice may have found its way underneath these SIM slots and some of the ISA slots. So it's quite possible that we have some corrosion underneath here. Same thing on this side of the board, the repair is barely noticeable. Well, I did an inspection of all the ISA slots, and there is clearly corrosion on some of these pins here. So that could definitely be our issue here. I have tried to clean this up with white vinegar, and I've used tons of deoxit, but I can still see some crusty pins here. It's been a while since I worked on this machine, so let's start with a quick test. Connect some power and a graphics card in ISA slot 5. Okay, let's flip that switch and see what it will do. Okay, we've got some high voltage and it posts. Now let's try slot number 4. And the system posts, and we still have normal graphics. Oh, that was actually slot number 6 and 5. Now let's try slot number 4. Yeah, still totally works. Slot number 3, and still working graphics. So how about slot number 2? And still working graphics. So how about slot number 1? We're getting nothing on the screen. So slot 1 is completely dead. Let's add a tiny speaker to the motherboard and turn it on again. We're getting 8 beeps for no graphics. So let's add some more sims. Oh, I just noticed I have already marked all of these ISA slots. This one is marked red. So apparently we have done this test before, and apparently it came to the same conclusion. ISA slot number 1 is dead, but the other slot seems to work fine. Okay, let's turn it on. Okay, it's counting up the RAM. It posts. We've got 8 working megs. But if I recall, we had some trouble with those SIM slots in the previous repair. Okay, my memory seems correct. No pun intended. This SIM slot here is clearly broken. It's supposed to look like this, or like this guy here. But as you can see, there is a large gap here. So I think the SIM slot is cracked. Or perhaps this piece here is just bent out of shape. Well, I don't really need this many SIM slots. 4 of these is enough. However, I need bank 0 to work. So we're gonna have to replace this broken slot. I'll see if I can find a spare. Otherwise, we can grab one of these and install here. I can just use larger modules to reach whatever RAM we're gonna go with. Okay, let's get this board nice and toasty and swap some SIM slots. I installed one thermocoupler on this side of the board and another one on this side, and then installed the board in the PCB holder. I'm gonna go with 130 degrees Celsius. From my experiment so far, that seems to be a safe temperature. We could probably go to 140, but I want to do some more tests on scrap boards before we try that on real projects. I know for sure that 146 is too high, but something in between could be perfect. While the board heats up, I'll add some fresh solder. Wow, that fan makes some crazy annoying noises. We need to mod this preheater and replace that noisy fan. If you don't have a preheater, check out one of my older videos where I show you how you can use a cheap heat gun instead. My new nozzles for the desoldering gun have not arrived from China yet, unfortunately. So I'm still stuck with this way too large nozzle. But hopefully this is the last board desoldered with the wrong nozzle. Well, it works on most pins, so it's not a major issue. I'm just gonna have to reflow and desolder a few of the pins a second time. Yeah, this is totally working. So as I mentioned, you don't need a preheater, but if you're doing this kind of stuff pretty much every week, this thing is an amazing time saver. It makes the job so much quicker, especially on a project like this with this many pins to desolder. Okay, that actually went really well. Just a few of the pins are still stuck, so I'll just add some fresh solder to those stubborn pins and have a second go. Okay, I gently pushed on all the pins and added some fresh solder to all the stuck pins. That seems to have done the trick. Okay, all the pins are free now, and the stubborn pins were of course the bent pins, but that has been sorted now. Let's gently push on these pins. If we're lucky, it will just drop, unless those bent pins get stuck. Still slightly stuck. So let's use a desoldering needle, and that did the trick. And here's our battery bond ISA slots. So these guys are in pairs, so each slot takes 2 SIMs. Okay, fresh solder added to all these pins, and these pins are smaller, so this could be a bigger challenge for my huge nozzle. No, this actually looks like it's working. Yeah, no problem, this is totally working. So I'll skip ahead here a bit. Okay, the first pair has been desoldered, and I checked all the pins and made sure none of them was stuck, and I think it's free to come off. Yep, here it dropped. And here's our first SIM slot. This one may not have been necessary to remove, but I want to check the traces underneath, because it was very close to where the battery was leaking. I'll remove the remaining slots off camera, otherwise I'm just gonna repeat myself. Okay, that took some patience, but now all the SIM slots are off. I haven't checked underneath yet, but there was some old battery juice on one of the slots. So I'm gonna let this board cool down, and we'll see what the condition is underneath. Before we continue, I'd like to say thank you to PCB for sponsoring this video. I have been using their PCBs for years now. This is just a few of the projects we have built on this channel. So head over to PCBWay.com and order some PCBs for your next project. Thank you PCBWay for supporting this channel. Okay, the board has cooled down, and this is looking really good. The battery juice has definitely been underneath these slots. You can tell because the pads close to the battery are discolored underneath the SIM slots. And same thing here underneath the ISA slots. But none of the traces are damaged. Underneath the damaged SIM slot there is a tiny amount of battery juice. But I don't think it has been damaged by the battery. So it has probably been damaged by someone installing a SIM here. Or perhaps it was bad from factory. We'll never know, but let's fix this. And that brings us to the new soldering station, the FNIRSI DWS-200. This was kindly sent in for free by FNIRSI, so I'm going to put a link below this video, where you can buy it, see if you like it. Now let's have a look inside and see what we've got. The holder is separate from the actual station, and I think that's a good design choice, because my bench is so crammed. Only the holder will take up the most valuable space, and I can keep the station further away from my working area. The holder also has this tip cleaner that is new to me, so this should be interesting to try out. And compared to the style of tip cleaner I'm used to, the station and the holder both have this rubber thingy here to store all the tips. That is a very nice time saver. This way I don't have to keep the tips elsewhere and go look for them when I need them. And apparently I got 2 soldering irons with this station. And apparently these are 2 different sizes, presumably for different tips. And this is excellent. This sent me no less than 10 different tips to try out. That is great. The power switch is absolutely tiny, and it's at the back of the station. This would normally be extremely annoying, but in this case not so much, because I'm just going to leave that thing on and turn it on and off at the front here. The station and the holder are connected together with this included cable. This way the station knows when the tip is in the holder and knows when to hibernate. There's also a USB-C connector at the back here, so presumably we can update the firmware if needed. We also have a cable holder included here. On each side of the station we've got these rubber covers, and they are made for these holders. So let's plug these guys in. This may actually come in really handy. Not as a PCB holder, I've got much better stuff to hold my PCBs. However, when soldering cables, I'm using this crappy old thing here from the 90s or whatever. I've had this thing for decades and it's really crappy. So this could be a really good option to soldering cables. And here's the assortment of tips I got. So we've got 3 tiny tips, 2 bend tips, 3 different sizes of chisel tips, and 1 bevel tip. To attach the tip, we can just use the holder and push on it firmly. When the tip is hot, we can also use the stand to remove the tip. Very handy. Okay, let's turn it on and check out the menu. And it went to 100 Celsius in a couple of seconds. This is the sleep mode. It also shows the time left to standby. That's quite neat. In the settings here we can choose the steps it's going to take when I change the temperature. And we also have some shortcuts here that we can set. I'm going to go with 360, 380 and 400. Let's see how high it will go. 450. That should be sufficient. And I'm going to set it to change the temperature in steps of 10 degrees Celsius. Okay, what else have we got? Oh, we can lower the volume of that beep. That is a welcome feature. That should be enough. We can also choose between Celsius and Fahrenheit. Okay, let's see how quickly it will heat up. Definitely quick enough. And as soon as we put it back in the stand, it starts lowering the temperature to 100 degrees Celsius. We can also set the station to turn off. In case I forget to turn it off, I'm gonna set it to 60 minutes. And I'm going to change the sleep mode to 150. That way it will heat up slightly quicker. So from 150 to 300, that was about 2 seconds. That is awesome. So I guess 100 degrees Celsius is enough in sleep mode. With these temperatures set, I can quickly switch between the 3 set temperatures I have chosen: 360, 380 and 400. I really like this interface. It's very quick and easy to use. I didn't even have to read the manual, although there is one included in Chinese and English. Now let's test that cleaning pad. I'll add some solder to the tip. That works great. That is actually a lot more efficient than my old cleaning pad. Yeah, this curly stuff here actually leaves some solder on the tip. So this is actually a lot better. Yeah, it gets perfectly cleaned very quickly and easily. So that's a new favorite for removing the solder on my tips. Well, I really like what I see so far, but how about some actual soldering? Let's start by cleaning up these discolored pads here. I'll add some flux first, and a tiny splash of solder on the tip, and then some wick. I'll start at 360, but solder wick sucks up quite a lot of heat, so this may not be enough. Actually it was. So this guy here actually seems to perform really well too. Yeah, this is totally working at 360 degrees. Perfect, so definitely passed the first test. Let's clean up these pads too. The trick here is not to push too hard, because then it will scratch the PCB. I guess in this case it won't matter because this isn't going to be visible. But in most cases it does matter. I'll clean up the flux with a dry Q-tip while it's still warm. That way it comes off very quickly and easily. And then I use a Q-tip dipped in IPA to remove the stickiness. To remove the solder still left in some of the through holes. I like to use desoldering needles. And then I just heat up the pad and gently push that solder out. Like so. This is a great tool. If you don't have one of these, you need to go on Amazon and pick one up right away. And now we can install 2 of the good slots in bank 0. And then I'm just going to solder 2 of the pins roughly in the middle of the socket. My favorite feature of the soldering iron so far is how extremely quickly it gets up to temperature. It reaches 360 degrees quicker than I can start soldering. Before I solder the remaining pins, I make sure the socket sits flush to the board. Some of these pins are connected to a large ground plane, so I increase the temperature slightly. And now it's perfectly set for this PCB. And I love that cleaning pad. It cleans the tip very quickly and efficiently. Yeah, as you can see for yourself, this is working perfectly. And a full disclosure, it was sent in for free, but they're not sponsoring this video. So this is my honest opinion. Thank you FNIRSI for sending it in. I don't really have anything to complain about, but I hope they make more tips for it. From what I can tell, it's powerful enough to remove some really large components too. So very large tip would be really useful. I think this Rework station is brand new, so they probably will make more tips for it. I just realized maybe they already have. I haven't actually checked. Okay, that was the last pin. That just worked perfectly. So hats off to FNIRSI. I have no complaints whatsoever. Okay, I went on AliExpress and picked up some ISA slots. And these are Wingtat branded. I like the original slots. These guys look like they're gold plated. They were a bit pricey, but I think this board is worth saving. As you can see, the pins on these original slots look a bit different. I guess I could Google this part number and see if they are gold plated. And again, I'm just going to solder 2 of the pins and make sure this connector is nice and straight. Otherwise I'm gonna get into trouble when installing cards in it. Well, I found our homepage, but unfortunately not this part number. So unfortunately no datasheet. Well, we're almost done here. And I have nothing else to add. It just works really well. This is a very nice upgrade from the Pinesil. This is a keeper. Now let's clean up that flux while it's still warm. I'm gonna give this board a proper wash after the video. Otherwise I'm gonna have to wait for it to dry before we can test it. And here's the final result. I would say that's good enough for me. Before we test the board, we're going to mod the crystal, because I don't have any faster crystals than the one that came with this board in the right form factor. These smaller crystals here are much easier to find. So in the previous overclocking video, we did a mod and soldered a smaller crystal to a socket, and that way it will fit this board. So I'm basically just going to install this crystal in a socket and then solder some extension leads. For this we're going to try out the smallest curved tip, and I have set the temperature to 330. Let's see if that's enough. Yes, it definitely is. These pins are a bit tricky to reach, but with a small tip this totally works. And the temperature is low enough not to melt the socket. And using the included helping hand, let's solder an extension lead to these 2 pins. Wow, that turned out to be a huge blob of solder. With the lead cut to size, we can now solder it to this pin of the socket. I just had to remove that huge blob of solder. That was too much to bear. I was actually able to use this tiny tip with solder wick to remove that blob. Okay, extension leads soldered to the crystal. And we now have one more crystal to try out on this board. To compensate for the missing slots, I'm going to add 4 meg modules. And these sims have 70 nanosecond chips. So hopefully they are fast enough for our overclocking today. We're going to start this test with the original crystal that came with this board. This is a 50 MHz crystal, so we should get a speed of 25 MHz. Next we need to add a jumper instead of the turbo switch. Otherwise this board is going to run really slow. For today's tests we're going to use a DX50. A bit of an oddball for reasons that are going to be apparent in a minute. We are of course going to install a graphics card in our new golden ISA slot. Okay, fingers crossed. Let's see if this works. Okay, we've got high voltage and it's counting up the RAM. We've got 2 beeps and it posts. Okay, all good so far. Let's add a controller for the next tests and a hard drive. Okay, let's boot and jump into BIOS. All the settings are gone because I removed the battery while we were soldering on the board. Okay, time and date set, and the correct hard drive is set to now. So let's exit, right to CMOS and boot. Oh crap, we don't have any benchmarks installed on this hard drive. Okay, benchmarks installed. We're not gonna come anywhere close to doom numbers. So let's run Superscape. Well, it's slow, really slow, but that is expected. Just need a number for comparison. I think we started this project off at around 10, and apparently we are now at 18. So let's swap that 50 MHz crystal with a 66 MHz crystal. It should now run at 33 MHz instead of 25. And run the benchmarks again. Still pretty slow, but a nice improvement. And we are now at 23.9. And now to the reason why I went with this rather odd choice of 486. And that is of course because it can go faster than 33 MHz. We can of course go with something much faster than this, and we probably will in a future video. But today I just want to see if this board can do 40. So now I have installed an 80 MHz crystal. Okay, fingers crossed. It's counting up the RAM. It's posting. We got a keyboard error. Oh no, that sucks. Let's try F1. Okay, well the keyboard actually works. But unfortunately, now it hanged. Oh, this sucks. I was really hoping it would do 40. This board is pretty crippled, without any local bus graphics or cache. So 40 MHz speed would have been extremely useful on this board. But unfortunately, it doesn't seem to work. Well, that was a disappointment. I'll wash that board and make it ready for the next attempt. Don't give up easily. I'm also gonna try to source a new SIM slot, so we can get this board back to original. And that was a good time to watch the much more successful overclocking video of IBM's 486 SX25 from the same year. I will end by saying thank you to my patrons. I appreciate your support. If you want to support me too, consider becoming a patron. Patrons get ad-free early access. If you like this video, let me know with a thumbs up in the comments. If you're a regular viewer, consider subscribing to this channel. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next week.